Support comes from the St. Louis Public Library Foundation. During these challenging times, free access to digital resources is a necessity. You can help our community stay connected. Support your St. Louis Public Library at slpl.org.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. Protest and activism comes in many forms, including in musical form. It's common practice for musicians to write out their feelings about current affairs and the state of the world so that they can draw attention to issues they find most important. St. Louis on the Air producer Lila Halabashish visited Tower Grove Park to ask folks about their favorite protest songs. And here's what she heard.
My favorite protest song is American Idiot by Green Day. I would say over the past 20 years, it's really held up. It's pretty timeless. It's also loud and in your face, and it just really focuses on the negative impacts of American nationalism, and I think that's really important to talk about now.
Don't wanna be an American idiot. Don't want a nation under the new media. Hey, can you hear the sound of hysteria? The subliminal mind of America.
Hold Out Your Hand by Brandi Carlile.
And why is that?
She's a great artist. She's really into activism. She really cares about everything that's going on, so she just stands for everything I believe in.
I run a lot of miles of life and crime and mountain climbs and quitting times, packing that load of lying rhymes and tired jokes and wooden dimes. I've been everybody's friend, everybody's friend. I could lose my house, I could steal a car, I could serve two masters, living hard, living like a dog in a cage in a yard with a fistful of cold hard cash that I can't let go. The devil can't have my soul, the devil can get your soul, the devil can get your soul. Hold out your head, take all the man and let, round and round we go.
I would say American Requiem by Beyonce, because it speaks to rebirth of American society and really the ways in which culture has been redefined over time and the ways that some artists are working to reclaim it.
It's a lot of talking going on while I sing my song. Can you hear me? I said, do you hear me? Look at that now. Look at that, look at that.
Buffalo Springfield, for what it's worth. Well, especially in the last few, I would say the last 6 months or so, with ICE, there's been a lot of similarities to like Ohio in the 60s with the National Guard. Same kind of thing going on. A lot of tension. And that song kind of covers it.
There's something happening here, but what it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop, children. What's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
Amy Ray, Let It Ring. She's from the Indigo Girls. She's branched off. They are both activists, and the words from Let It Ring are exactly what's going on in today. And both of The artists from Indigo Girls are very involved with activism today, and I love everything that they say about it, and it gives me goosebumps because they are right along with us.
When you march, stand up straight. When you fill the world with hate, step in time with your kind and let it rain.
And there's also protest music being created right here and right now in St. Louis. Recently, Kayla Thompson, who performs under the moniker KVTheWriter, released diss tracks aimed at controversial real estate developer Paul McKee, St. Louis Mayor Cara Spencer, and most recently Congressman Wesley Bell. The latter is titled They Walk Among Us, performed to the instrumental of Kendrick Lamar's Man at the Garden.
They walk among us, demons with agendas wearing masks, like they going skiing, took the white sheets off their head. They walk among us, witnessing a genocide in mass, took a trip to witness, said they wouldn't call it that. They walk among us, demons planning right next to your dad, your mother and your family looking like us blending in. They walk among us, some will say that Wesley isn't bad, he looked just like your brother, he is nothing but a man, but he's among us. Had his campaign running on us, said he make change, not McCullough, claimed to do things that will fund us and save us, open those old cases, but kept not one promise, convicted black faces, bitch moving with racists and killers and cops, was losing the races, got bought by APOC, they paid for his campaign, sold out for a spot, the most funds in history, gave him a life.
The damage is so extensive, unbelievable what people are going through right now. There are no words to describe the feeling of hopelessness that people are. We are doing our best to bring resources as needed.
They walk among us, demons with agendas wearing masks, like they going skiing, took the white sheets off their head.
St. Louis on the Air producer Darius Varner spoke with KV about her protest music, and she shared how she came to write and record those protest songs.
I wrote the diss towards Paul McKee first.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote both of the disses in the same day. Mm-hmm. Well, I wrote part of Wesley Bell's that same day. And then I wrote Cara Spencer's in the studio when I was recording, because I'm like, actually, I should probably keep rapping. But my inspiration from the Paul McKee one, I watched a video from, I can't even remember who it was, but they were just talking. I've heard of Paul McKee, but they were like breaking it down, how he has really devastated North City.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I'm going to make a song about this. But I wanted to make sure that I educated people while, I was rapping, because I may say, I may say some bars, you may not understand what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. So I actually used a lot of STLPR's articles in my videos. Yeah. So just so people could go back and do their own research. Like, I'm not just saying anything. Here are some reliable sources for you to do your own research on these folks. And so then when I did the Wesley Bell and Cara Spencer diss, I know what's been happening, and so I'm like, I'm about to just do research. What have they been doing? Mm-hmm. I'm like, okay, make a rap about that.
Was that important to you to educate?
Yes, it was. I didn't want people to just take my word for it. Mm-hmm. A lot of times some rappers just say anything, mm-hmm. and it's like, actually, that's not true. Like, you can't just say whatever you want, especially when you have a platform. I think artists have a responsibility to their audience, because when you have a lot of influence, you have people listening and watching, and they look up to you, or they believe what you say just because you have a platform. Yeah. You might not necessarily always be right, but I think that's why we have a duty to make sure that we are careful with our words. And that's not to say you shouldn't have freedom of expression, but just be careful with what you say, and make sure you at least say, this is my opinion. Mm-hmm. And so I think I told folks that this is my opinion. Yeah. From my personal experience.
Got it. So with, I think most people saw the kind of intense response from Wesley Bell. How did you handle that, and were you expecting it at all?
I was not expecting that at all. I was like, what? And then he said, like, I'm not in junior high. I'm like, clearly you are responding, saying you don't do the back and forth on social media. Then why did you respond in the first place? I think I handled my response well. I just told him, like, this is like, I'm not Corey's watchdog or whatever he said. I'm like, this is my own personal opinion about you. I met Wesley Bell years ago. He volunteered at this youth program that I did. And back then I thought, that he was dedicated to social justice. And I said in my response, like, I'm like, people think rappers are just dumb, or they don't know who people are really. And I'm like, I am, the family members of Betty L. Thompson, the Honorable Betty L. Thompson, who is a state rep. I have politicians in my family. I know what a great leader looks like. And unfortunately, I don't think that's you. He did not respond to that.
Has his team or anybody reached out to you at all?
No, they're not going to reach out.
They're not going to reach out. Was there any response from Cara Spencer or her team?
No. I forgot to mention, so both of those songs are, they're freestyles. So I'm taking a beat or an instrumental from a song that already exists. So the first one, the Paul McKee diss called Devils in the City, that is a Community by J.I.D. That's his song. And then the Cara Spencer and Wesley Bell diss is Man in the Garden by Kendrick Lamar. And so in Man in the Garden, Kendrick Lamar says, "We deserve it all," over and over again. So I kind of took that and said, they walk among us.
As a Black queer woman, as an artist, as a musician, why was it important for you to use your art in that way?
I feel like you don't see voices like mine all the time in that space. Or like we exist. We're here. We don't get the platform. A lot of times we have to create our own platform to get heard in any industry, honestly. And I think it was important for me to tell this story as a impacted person. Like, I'm impacted by these folks' policies and the way they're maneuvering. Like, it's impacted me. It's impacting people in my community, like literally my neighborhood. So I feel like it was important for a survivor to speak about these things.
That was Kayla Thompson, also known as KVTheWriter. She's a hip-hop artist who wrote protest music in the form of diss tracks aimed at real estate developer Paul McKee, St. Louis's Mayor Cara Spencer, and most recently, Missouri Congressman Wesley Bell. As KVTheWriter mentioned, Congressman Bell responded to her in the comments of her diss track, They Walk Among Us. In Bell's response, he brings up former Congresswoman Cori Bush. It reads in part, "Interesting. Your candidate, a.k.a. the fighter that won't fight, still won't see me in a debate. So she needs her acolytes to troll for her, I see. Bare minimum, huh? I've been able to help secure more resources and jobs in less than a year than she was able to do in 4. But I don't do the back and forth on social media because I'm not in junior high." Joining us now to talk more about the growth of protest and activism within popular music is Lauren Eldridge Stewart, the assistant professor of ethnomusicology at Washington University. Professor Stewart is also the co-host of STLPR's live Saturday broadcasts of the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra. Professor, welcome to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Thanks for having me.
Before we delve into history here, what do you make of people like KVTheWriter using music to criticize St. Louis political leaders?
Well, I think that it falls very much into the tradition. And by the tradition, you might ask, okay, well, what tradition? And it's actually a lot of traditions. It's both the tradition of hip hop, right? So this exchange that you're narrating just now sounds very much like a vintage hip hop battle, right? Played out over social media, which of course is a newer innovation to this. But it also reminds me of blues exchanges. It also reminds me of what griots did and the purposes of griots in our culture dating from West Africa. This was a tradition of social critique that's really been continued in various forms into the present.
Do you think there's something about St. Louis in particular that lends itself well to blending music, politics, and protests?
I think there is, because there is a certain level of localness here, right? And ability and the capacity of folks to really know each other, and then also to call each other out, right? So even in that exchange that you mentioned before, she goes back to this encounter that she's already had with the congressman, and he's also citing this sort of intimacy, or claiming this sort of intimacy. So I think that part of St. Louis, that aspect of St. Louis, really contributes to this discussion, as well as this sort of undertone of the blues, which I definitely hear in the Man in the Garden track.
So how would you define protest music?
I tend to have a really capacious definition of protest music.
How so?
Because, and this really started some years ago. I saw this really wild Super Bowl commercial featuring Kendall Jenner and Pepsi.
I know what you're about to say, but please continue.
And, somehow, world peace was achieved over a can of soda. And it led to all sorts of questions about, well, where does politics actually fall in music? And so I tend to make the argument that much more music than we think is political. The presence of politics in music, sometimes it's really overt, sometimes it's really explicit, but sometimes it is more implicit. And so a lot of actions can actually be read. A lot of actions and gestures in the music can be read.
Do you think the term protest song and a political song are synonyms, or do you think that there's a difference between the two? That was something I've really been wrestling with, and I'd be interested in your take on that.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. They're not. They're not. I think a protest song has that sort of additional value of being really intentional. Whereas a lot of music is political, even though sometimes it tries not to be.
Yeah, I think so too. And that might be a semantical debate, but I really think there is a difference between the two. But let's go back well before the modern era. What do you think the earliest protest song you can think of, and what was it about?
So the earliest protest song that I can think of is probably... Well, it's definitely sort of pre-recording technology, right? So it's not necessarily something that I can easily say, all right, hop on YouTube and look for this. But I already mentioned these griots in West Africa who were sort of called upon by their broader societies to critique leadership, right? Pull them into order, make sure that the needs of the people were being met. But also we can trace this back to the era of the transatlantic slave trade and the spirituals that were sung by enslaved peoples. Oftentimes, these were intensely political and really critiqued the existing power structures. Things like, Didn't My Lord Deliver Daniel, for instance. This is a spiritual that sounds very much just like a Bible story, but actually then the response goes to, Didn't my Lord deliver Daniel? Then why not every man? Is obviously about freedom.
And I would imagine because slavery is such a major part of American history, these types of protest songs probably stretch back well before the country's founding, most likely. Is that a fair assumption?
Absolutely, absolutely. So the beginning of spirituals, we can date these back to these hush harbors and then the beginning of maroon communities where people eventually learn how to escape through other means, through extra legal means. But yes, this happens from the moment that people are under duress on these shores. We are hearing impressions of protest music. And it's reflected in the literature, too.
Do you think there are certain genres that lend themselves well to this type of music? I'd be interested if you think it transcends beyond just one genre.
It absolutely transcends beyond one genre. There are a lot of genres that I group, at least in my mind, as narrative genres, storytelling genres. And so even in the list that was offered in the montage at the beginning of this segment, you had a lot of country music representation, a lot of folk music. These are genres that tell stories. There's also even rock in there, which if we trace rock back through the blues and R&B as sort of predecessors, then you definitely have that narrative element there too.
And I think for contemporary music, if we're just talking about music that became popular because it was put on a record and mass produced and used as a commodity, like two things that come to mind are the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War inspiring a lot of protest songs. What do you think it was about those two particular events that produced so much memorable music that we're still absorbing to this day?
Well, I think that in part it was sort of a golden moment for protest music because you have not only the means for a lot of different types of musical acts to, sort of get their voices out, but also mass production is turning towards youth culture. And so there is also a lot of incentive for people to produce the music because there are a lot of listening ears and ready and receptive ears.
I want to turn this conversation closer to home because I remember after Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, just hearing a lot of music from local artists about not only him, but the protest movement that came after it. And I think that sort of morphed throughout the country when there were other examples of police killing Black people in very highly publicized ways of like major artists talking about the whole concept of police accountability and the relationship between police and Black people. What do you think, or how do you think the Ferguson protests and music were intertwined with each other?
I think that music is a really efficient carrier of both ideas, but also like this sort of affective connection, right? So using some music that we heard earlier in the clip, this sort of call and response that's started by KVTheWriter, so They Walk Among Us, this is something that's sort of designed to stick with you long after the song fades. And so I think that there was something that really captured the attention of a lot of people in a lot of different places, that point of connection, and then they were able to repeat that line in their own context.
I think one example immediately after Michael Brown's death, maybe not immediately, a year after, is I remember going to protests and hearing people like basically say lyrics off of All Right by Kendrick Lamar. And that song became really associated not only with the protest movements here, but everywhere. And there are probably a lot of examples of like songs that get released into the popular consciousness that get attached to activism, even if it wasn't specifically about the protest or the event that was happening there. Can you talk more about that phenomenon? Because I imagine it happens all the time.
Yes, it does happen all of the time. And I think All Right is such an awesome example because it has a sort of meaning that is spoken or sung by the artist, right? So there is that version, but then every time it's repeated, it then accrues different meanings, right? People then are able to put their own meaning, layer their own meaning on top of that. So, I mean, even this practice of taking a beat from one artist and then reapplying it to another track, it doesn't just come as a series of, percussion and bass rhythms. It also has the meaning of the previous track, and that's carried forward into the new track.
We always seem to see political diss tracks and protest songs coming from the more liberal side of the equation. I know the answer to this, and I'm going to follow up, but has there also been like more conservative coded musical tracks that maybe protest things that conservatives are angry about?
Sure. Yes. Yes, I think that there has been. None are coming immediately to mind. I can think of, for example, recent conservative protest events. I think like the counter Super Bowl halftime by Kid
I'll
Rock.
give two examples.
Okay.
So after the War on Terror, there was Courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue by Toby Keith, which was basically a pro Let's Invade Afghanistan song. And in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, you saw Eric Clapton and Van Morrison do a explicitly anti-mask song. There's this rapper named Tom McDonald who is like a conservative white rapper from Canada. And look, a lot of music critics are liberal, so they probably don't like them. But really, the songs from a quality standpoint are not nearly up to the quality of For What It's Worth by Buffalo Springfield or Fight the Power by Public Enemy. There's no line about Elvis being a hero to most, but he never meant, as a family radio show, so I'm not going to continue that. Is it just the quality of music matters too? Like those two songs I mentioned on the liberal side are objectively good songs, and the ones I mentioned to you are critically panned. That has to make some difference, would you think?
I think it does make a difference. I mean, aesthetic value matters. And songs aren't repeated if they're bad, whether they are liberal or conservative, right? So I think that arguably the songs that we're hearing cited in the park, their value just sort of carries because it's memorable, good music.
Well, I also want to talk about the songs that are protest songs but go completely over the heads of people they're targeting. My favorite example of this is Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen, which if you read the lyrics, it is a very literal, direct protest against how Vietnam veterans were treated in the 1980s. And yet it's still played at Republican political events when it's decidedly not a pro-USA song. Why do you think that happens? Do people just not read the lyrics and they just heard the chorus and think, this is a great song about the USA?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happens. And there is something really inviting and participatory about the groups that people want to get in on. And sometimes they're willing to ignore really precisely stated meanings.
I also think that we were kind of talking about this before the show. A lot of artists have to walk a really fine tightrope if they are not doing a very explicit song. American Requiem by Beyonce is probably one of the most beautiful protest songs, maybe of the 21st century, even though it is not very explicit. And I think she nails it. There are other very memorable songs out there that are about very specific things, but they are so unspecific in the lyrics that they get flattened over time. A good example of that is Shout by Tears for Fears, which is an anti-nuclear war song. Apparently Makes Me Wonder by Maroon 5 is an anti-George W. Bush song, but if you listen to it, you kind of get it after that context, but it kind of seems like a prototypical Maroon 5 lead singer is upset with the girl song. So how do people walk that tightrope between being so explicit and literal that their songs become dated and go over the heads of people, and being so metaphorical that people miss the point years later?
Well, I think there's always going to be a little bit of missing the point, especially years later, because contexts rapidly change, right? And so some of the original context of, say, even that Beyonce song, we're going to lose in a few years, right? We won't have the sort of additional fraught, wow, when this was released, there wasn't supposed to be this Black popular voice in country music. The context won't be as fixed, and so some of that will fall by the wayside. But how do people achieve this balance? I think with really large teams, songwriting is generally a collective process and a really big team process. So,
and like the last minute or so, I do want to point out songs where people kind of put their own political meanings in. A good example recently is YMCA by the Village People, which at one point was a gay rights anthem and is now like the Donald Trump anthem 30 or 40 years later. And a humorous one that I have invented, and I admit talking about her is a little dicey now because she's been in a lot of trouble recently, but Katy Perry's Dark Horse, which is clearly about the election of James K. Polk in 1844. I mean, are you ready for a perfect storm, the perfect storm of other Democratic candidates falling by the wayside so James K. Polk could become president? It's pretty obvious that's about it, right?
I think I'm going to let you have that one.
I think, though, that I think that we can both agree that protest and politics and music go hand in hand throughout American history.
Absolutely.
Lauren Eldridge Stewart is a professor at Washington University. Professor, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
And before we go, and before we wrap up today's show, I want to invite you, our listeners, to this conversation. What's your favorite protest song, and why does it resonate with you? Send us a voicemail at 314-516-6397. That's 314-516-NEWS.
This episode was produced by Maya Norfleet and Darius Varner. It was edited by Maya with production assistance from Lila Halal-Bashich.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Emily Woodbury.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.